Good mould versus bad mould. What makes mould edible? Mouldy food is spoiled food, right? And definitely not safe to eat. Except for a few cheeses, well, they're okay to eat with mould. Oh, and salami, which has fine white mould on its outer casing. But definitely no other foods are safe to eat if they have mould, right? Well, except for soy sauce, which is the juice of mouldy soybeans, and Indonesian soybean cake tempeh, which owes its texture and taste to the presence of mould filaments. So it turns out that many foods are safe to eat when mould affected, or are actually created using good moulds. Mould belongs to the fungi kingdom of living organisms, along with mushrooms and yeasts, which are also important to human foods. Bread, wine, and beer are made with the yeast Saccharomyces cerevisiae, while Japanese rice wine, sake, and Chinese liquors are produced using moulds including Aspergillus oryzae and Mucor indicus. Mushrooms such as shitake, morels, and truffles are valued for their flavour, aroma, texture, and nutritional qualities in many cultures. Moulds are properly known as hyphomycetes, so called because they have filamentous hyphae, which are strands or strings of material. Moulds reproduce with airborne spores or with conidia, they're sort of propagation lumps. Mushrooms are fungi with fruiting bodies that are visible to the naked eye and which function to disperse spores. Yeasts are single-celled fungi that are only visible with a microscope and which can also reproduce with spores or by budding or splitting off. Some moulds are okay to eat, like Penicillium roqueforti, which is responsible for the blue veins in blue cheese. Penicillium camemberti and Geotrichum candidum, the white moulds on camembert and brie, and Rhizobus oligosporus or Rhizobus oryzae in tempeh. Why then are most other moulds considered to be hazards to food safety? The key is in a mould's ability to produce mycotoxins. Mycotoxins are toxins, harmful chemicals produced by moulds. Mycotoxins are chemical hazards in foods such as grains and milk, and they are of increasing concern to food safety experts because they are becoming more prevalent in certain areas due to climate change. Mycotoxins from different moulds are dissimilar to each other in both their chemistry and their toxicity. They're typically low molecular weight natural chemicals, small molecules, but otherwise only grouped together because they are all made by filamentous fungi, or moulds. Mycotoxin-producing moulds are mostly found on grains and nuts, but also appear on fruits and vegetables including apples, dates, and figs. Animal foods like dairy, meat, and fish can also be contaminated with mycotoxins if the animals from which they were sourced have eaten mould-affected foods. Mycotoxin consumption can have acute, deadly consequences. For example, the disease alimentary toxic alukia, caused by eating food made from grain colonized with certain fusarium moulds, affected a large number of people in the former Soviet Union during World War II. More than 100,000 young turkeys died after eating feed containing peanut meal from mouldy peanuts in 1962. The mould was Aspergillus flavus and the mycotoxins were aflatoxins. Mycotoxins can cause acute illnesses. However, the effects of mycotoxin ingestion are usually subtle. Aflatoxin B1, for example, is a carcinogen most commonly linked to chronic rather than acute disease. Aflatoxin B1 is the most potent natural carcinogen known. Aflatoxins are produced by Aspergillus flavus, a mould that attacks grain crops as well as other Aspergillus species. Chronic exposure to low levels of aflatoxins causes cancer, immune suppression, and other chronic conditions in animal feeding studies and are classified as potent human carcinogens. Good moulds are not generally known to be mycotoxin producers and have a long history of safe food consumption. There's an asterisk in the article about this, and I'll get to that at the end. These moulds are deliberately added to food or encouraged to grow during food production. The white mould on the surface of dry-cured salamis, Penicillium nalgiavense, for example, is deliberately applied to the surface. And that's called inoculation, and that is to discourage the growth of other less desirable moulds and yeasts. Mycologists refer to the desirable good moulds used in food production as being domesticated, the same way that cows are domesticated animals. Some species of edible moulds are not just domesticated, but owe their entire existence to humans. For example, Penicillium camemberti is a human-created species created by selective breeding in the late 19th century by cheesemakers who valued its soft texture and bright white colour. As a man-made organism, Penicillium camembertii does not occur naturally in nature. It is found only in cheese environments and is deliberately added to camembert and bred during their manufacture. Unlike Penicillium camemberti, which occurs only in cheesemaking, the blue cheese mould, Penicillium roqueforti, can be found in many places in nature. So I guess we'd call it a wild mould. While it is desirable in Roquefort cheese, Penicillium roqueforti causes undesirable spoilage in other foods, including meat and wheat, making it both good and bad. In short, moulds that are deliberately added to food for their desirable properties have a long history of safe use by humans and are considered edible. Moulds not purposefully added to food could be producing mycotoxins which are dangerous to ingest and are, in the context of food safety, bad moulds. Some moulds are desirable in certain foods but cause spoilage in other foods. And the asterisk at the end of the article is a bit interesting. 2 of the desirable and safe cheese moulds associated with cheese production, Penicillium roqueforti and Penicillium camemberti, actually produce toxic chemicals, including penicillin acid, roquefortine, and cyclopyrazonic acid. However, they do not seem to cause significant health effects, or more research is needed. So that's the end of good mould versus bad mould, and if you know someone who would enjoy this, please share it with them.